Welcome to the Karma Verdict. Let us get started with today's story. My fiancée sat across from me at our own kitchen table, twisting the ring I gave her, and told me that her ex had gotten down on one knee the night before, and that she had said yes. She said it the way you'd mentioned the weather. And in that exact second, while she waited for me to fall apart, I made a decision that would burn her entire world to the ground by the end of the month. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled. And that smile scared her more than any shouting ever could. My name is Daniel Cole. I'm 36, and I build custom cabinetry for a living, which means my hands are rough, my patience is long, and I know better than anyone that you cannot rush good wood and you cannot uncut a bad measurement. Everything in my life I built slowly, on purpose, one careful joint at a time. The house, the shop, the savings. And for 3 years I built my life around a woman named Sabrina Hale. And for most of those 3 years, I honestly believed the two of us fit together like a joint that didn't need glue. That's the part that still gets me. Not that she left. That I didn't see how long she'd been planning to. Let me back up and tell it right, because you deserve the whole thing, the way it actually happened, so that when the ending comes, you'll understand exactly why I smiled. We met at a friend's backyard barbecue on a Saturday in June. I wasn't looking for anything. I'd been single for 2 years, married to my work, and I'd made my peace with the idea that maybe some men just build things for other people's families and go home to a quiet house. Then Sabrina laughed at something dumb I said about the grill, reached out and touched my arm, and looked at me like I was the most interesting man there. And I was gone. Just gone. She was beautiful in the way that makes strangers slow down on the sidewalk, and she was funny and quick. And she asked me questions about my work like the answers mattered to her. Nobody had ever asked me about dovetail joints like they were poetry. I fell hard and I fell fast. And I want to be honest with you, that speed was my first mistake. Because when you fall that fast, you don't check the ground for how far down it goes. Sabrina worked in brand marketing at a glass tower downtown, the kind of office where people wore shoes that cost more than my monthly truck payment and called it an investment. Her world was all surfaces and appearances, and who got invited to what. My world was sawdust and blueprints and clients who cried a little when they saw the kitchen table their grandmother would have loved. For a while, I thought we balanced each other. She said I kept her grounded. I said she made me braver. We moved in together after a year, into the house I'd bought before I ever met her. A solid little 3-bedroom I'd been slowly renovating with my own hands. She redecorated the living room, and I let her, because watching her make my house feel like ours was worth more to me than any color scheme. 2 years in, on a hillside at sunset, I got down on one knee with my grandmother's ring, the one thing of real value my family ever passed down, and Sabrina said yes and cried, and I thought that was the happiest I would ever be. I need you to know I loved her completely, because the man who got betrayed has to be a man who loved, or the ending doesn't mean anything. Now the first crack. It showed up wearing a name, Trevor Ashford, her college boyfriend, the one who dumped her at 24 to go, and I quote, find himself sailing around places I could only ever see on a screen, all on his family's money. For 5 years, he'd been a closed chapter, a name that came up maybe twice, both times with an eye roll. Then one ordinary Tuesday, over a dinner I'd cooked, his name slid into the conversation like a splinter you don't notice until it's deep. Trevor messaged me today, she said, scrolling through her phone while her plate went cold. He's back in the country. Wants to catch up. Something in me went still. I said carefully that I wasn't comfortable with that. She reached across the table, patted my hand the way you'd pat a nervous dog, and said, don't be insecure. It's nothing. We're just old friends. I want you to remember that phrase, because it's the exact sentence people use right before they set your whole life on fire. Just old friends. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself a secure man doesn't police his fiancée's friendships. So I swallowed it, and I smiled, and I passed her the bread. And that's the moment I look back on now and want to shake myself. Because that was the first measurement I let slide. And once you let one slide, the whole cabinet comes out crooked. The late nights started small. A work dinner here, a networking thing there. She'd grab her keys, kiss my cheek, and say, don't wait up. And at first I didn't, because why would I? But then it was twice a week. Then she started dressing differently for those dinners. Better, sharper, a shade of lipstick she never used to wear. She started laughing at her phone in the other room. That low private laugh a person only makes for someone specific. She stopped asking about my day And she started coming home carrying a cologne that wasn't mine, a warm, expensive smell that would follow her through the house. And she'd shower before bed when she never used to, and she'd fall asleep with her back to me, and her phone face down on the nightstand. Always face down. Here's what nobody tells you about being cheated on. You know before you know. Your body figures it out weeks before your mind will let you say the word. I'd lie awake at 2 in the morning with my stomach in a fist, telling myself I was imagining it, that I was insecure, that Sabrina would never, and the whole time some quiet animal part of me was already grieving. I lost 11 pounds that spring without trying. I'd stand in my shop with a chisel in my hand and forget what I was doing. But I didn't confront her. And I want to tell you why, because this is the hinge the whole story swings on. I didn't confront her because I've spent my whole life reading materials. When a board comes into my shop with a warp in it, you don't yell at the board. You don't force it. You set it aside, you watch it, you let it tell you what it's going to do, and only then do you decide how to cut. And Sabrina had started to warp right there in front of me. And every instinct I'd built over 20 years of working with my hands told me the same thing. Don't react. Watch. Let it show you the whole shape before you make a single cut. So I watched. God, I watched. And the more I watched, the more she showed me. Because a person who thinks they're getting away with something gets careless. And Sabrina got very careless. She lost her spare car key and got a new fob, and never wondered aloud where the old one went, which meant someone else had it. She started paying for dinners in cash when she'd always been a card person, which meant she didn't want a statement. And one night, the night everything crystallized for me, she came home at almost 1 in the morning, and I happened to be in the garage, sanding a drawer face because I couldn't sleep, and she didn't see me through the window. She sat in her car in our driveway for 11 minutes. I timed it because I'm a man who measures things. 11 minutes, texting, smiling down at the screen with a softness she had not aimed at me in months. Then she fixed her face in the visor mirror, took a breath, and came inside wearing a completely different expression, tired and put upon. The mask of a woman coming home from a long, dull evening. When she saw me standing there in the dark, she jumped like I was the intruder in my own house. God, you scared me, she said, hand on her chest. What are you doing up? Working, I said. You? Long dinner. Marketing stuff. You'd be bored, I nodded. And I went back to my sanding. And that was the night something in me changed permanently. I stopped being her fiancé, in my head, and I became something colder and more useful. An investigator. A man taking quiet inventory of a marriage that hadn't happened yet, and had better not. Now, I could have snooped through her phone that night. Plenty of men would have. But I didn't need to, and here's the thing. I didn't want the version of the truth I'd have to steal. I wanted the version she'd hand me herself. Because a truth you're given is a truth you can act on cleanly, and a truth you steal is a truth she can turn around on you. So I let her keep her secrets a little longer. And instead, I started paying attention to the one language I speak better than anyone. Money. Because a person will lie to your face, but their bank account tells the truth every single time. And this is where the story turns from a sad one into a different kind of story altogether. So stay with me. I need to tell you about her mother first, because you cannot understand what I did, or why it worked, without understanding Vivian Hale. Vivian was the kind of woman who introduced her own daughter by her job title and her salary. She had opinions about wine she couldn't afford, and a coat she mentioned the brand of twice per conversation. And from the very first dinner, Vivian did not like me. To her, I was a nice enough boy with dirt under his fingernails, a placeholder, a warm body keeping the seat next to her daughter occupied, until something with a real portfolio came along. At every holiday, she'd tilt her head and ask when I was going to do something with myself, as if building things families would use and love for 30 years wasn't doing something. She'd say he works with his hands to her friends in a tone that made it sound like an affliction. And she adored, absolutely adored, the idea of Trevor. She'd never met him, but she'd met his last name, and to Vivienne a good last name was the same thing as a good man. And Ashford was old money, sailing money, the kind of name that opened doors she'd been knocking on her whole life. So here's what I understood. Sitting in my quiet house doing my quiet math. If this ever came down to a fight, Vivienne would not be in my corner. She'd be across the room, holding Trevor's coat, smiling, and knowing that, really knowing it, turned out to be the single most valuable thing I owned. Because most men, when they find out, they explode. They confront, they beg, they scream, they throw the ring, and in doing so they hand the person who betrayed them all the power. Because now the cheater gets to be the victim of a crazy man. I decided I was going to do the exact opposite. I was going to stay calm. I was going to find out everything, quietly. And only when I knew the full shape of the board would I make one clean cut, and it would be finished before anyone even knew the saw was running. So I went to the bank. On a Thursday, on my lunch break, by myself, I sat down with a teller I'd built a nursery for 2 years back, and I pulled the full statements on our joint savings account, the one we'd been feeding for the wedding, and what I found made my ears ring so loud I had to ask her to repeat herself. Over the previous 4 months, Sabrina had moved just under $19,000 out of our shared savings. Not all at once, in small, forgettable, deliberate amounts. $400 here, $650 there, $1,200 once. Into an account I had never seen, in her name only, at a bank we didn't use. Some of the transfers were labeled wedding florist, catering deposit, venue hold, except I had been to every single wedding meeting with her, and I had never met these vendors. And the numbers didn't match a single quote we'd actually gotten. My hands were steady, which surprised me. I asked the teller to print everything. Then I went out to my truck, and I sat in the parking lot, and I called one of the florists, the one labeled for a $600 deposit. A cheerful voice answered, "Good afternoon. Thank you for calling," and named a boutique hotel 2 towns over. A hotel. I said I had the wrong number, and I hung up, and I sat there in the sunlight, and I understood something so clean and so cold that it almost felt like relief. Sabrina wasn't just leaving me. She was going to leave me, and she was going to take a piece of me with her on the way out. And she was going to do the whole thing while wearing my grandmother's ring so that I'd keep smiling and passing her the bread right up until the day she vanished. She'd been funding her double life with our wedding money. She'd been buying hotel rooms with the savings I'd bled for, one job at a time, and calling them centerpieces. That was the day the smile started living on my face. Not a happy smile, a carpenter's smile, the one you get when a difficult board finally reveals its grain, and you realize you know exactly how to cut it now. So I made my first cut, and it wasn't dramatic, and that's the whole point. That same afternoon, I drove to a different bank, and I opened a new savings account in my name only. Over the next 2 weeks, I moved my half of our joint savings into it, in amounts as small and forgettable as hers had been. Because I'd learned the technique from watching her, I paid the next 3 mortgage payments in advance out of my own money, and I kept every receipt in a folder. I went out to the shop one evening, and I photographed every tool, every machine, the truck, the lot, and I emailed the whole list to myself with the date stamped on it. I called an old client of mine, a lawyer I'd built a home office for years back, and I told him everything, and he walked me through where I stood in about 20 minutes. And here's the beautiful part, the part that let me sleep at night. I wasn't stealing anything, not $1. Every single thing I moved was mine, earned by my own 2 hands, bought before she ever walked into my life. The house was in my name, purchased 2 years before we met. The shop, the business, the tools, all mine, all predating her. We were never married, so there was no marital estate to split. The only genuinely shared thing was that joint savings account, which was legally half hers. And here's the thing my lawyer pointed out with a slow grin. She's already documented her own bad faith, he said, tapping the printout of the $19,000 in transfers. She moved joint funds into a private account and mislabeled them. You don't need to do anything aggressive. You just need to keep your receipts, stay calm, and let the paper speak. Stay calm. I almost laughed. I was born calm. So for 2 more weeks, I lived a double life of my own, except mine was legal and hers was not. Every night Sabrina came home smelling like another man's cologne, and every night I asked how her day was, and every night she said fine, tired, wedding stuff, and kissed my cheek, and every night I smiled and said goodnight, and meant something entirely different by it than she thought. Boards warping, I'd think, lying in the dark next to her. Let it show you the whole shape, and then, on a Sunday, the whole shape finally showed itself. She came home from what she called a spa day, glowing in a way that had absolutely nothing to do with a massage, and she sat me down at our kitchen table, and she folded her hands. And I knew. I actually felt that same strange relief flood through me, because after months of watching the cracks spread across the wood, it was finally going to break, and I could stop pretending I couldn't hear it splitting. "Daniel," she said, in a soft, rehearsed, terribly gentle voice, "I have to be honest with you, because I respect you too much to keep lying." Respect. That word, out of the mouth of the woman with $19,000 of my savings sitting in a secret account and another man's cologne, still faintly in her hair. I said nothing. I just looked at her. "Trevor proposed to me last night," she said. And I said yes. She let that sit, watching my face, waiting. "I never stopped loving him, Daniel. Itrid. I swear to you I tried to bury it and build a life with you. And you're a good man. You're such a good man. But the heart wants what it wants, and I can't marry you knowing my heart belongs to someone else. It wouldn't be fair to you." She kept going. She'd clearly practiced this. She said we could still be friends. She said she hoped that one day I'd look back and understand. She said she'd already told her mother, and her mother agreed a clean break was for the best, which told me Vivienne had known before I did, which told me exactly how alone I was in that moment. She said all of it in that same weather report calm, watching my eyes the entire time, waiting for the collapse she had so carefully prepared to comfort me through, because that's the secret cruelty of the person who leaves. They don't just want to go, they want to watch you break, because your breaking is the proof that they mattered, that leaving them cost something, that they were loved enough to ruin a man. And I looked at her, at my grandmother's ring still on her finger, at the woman I had been ready to give my entire life to, and I gave her the one thing that would cost her everything. I stayed calm. "Okay," I said. She blinked. "Okay. Okay," I said again, and I even nodded slowly. "Thank you for being honest with me." That was not in her script. Not even close. She'd written a scene with a broken man in it. A man who'd beg or rage or weep. A man whose pain would confirm that she was the beautiful heartbreaker walking bravely toward her true love. And instead, she got a cabinetmaker looking calmly at a board that had finally shown him its grain. A man who was already, quietly, 3 cuts ahead of her. "I'll need my ring back," I said. It was my grandmother's. It doesn't leave the family. Her hand curled protectively toward her chest. I thought maybe I could keep it, as a keepsake of what we know, I said, and I was still smiling. And I think the smile is what unsettled her most. "You said yes to Trevor. Let Trevor buy you a ring." Slowly, she slid it off her finger, and she set it on the table between us like it had gone hot in her hand. I picked it up, wiped it once on my shirt out of pure reflex, and slid it into my pocket. "I'm going to head to the shop for a while," I said, standing. "Take tonight to pack whatever you want to take." "But Sabrina? Only what's actually yours." She frowned, thrown by the calm. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means only what's yours," I said pleasantly. And I picked up my keys and I walked out. And I let the door close soft behind me. Because a slammed door is a man losing, and I had already decided I was going to win. Now here's where a lesser story sends me to a bar to drink and stew. Not me. I did not go to the shop to sulk. I drove straight to the one person in this entire situation who actually held the power, the one lever that could move Sabrina's whole world. And I want to be clear, I did it with my hands steady and my heart quiet. I drove to Vivienne, because I had learned one thing above all else building custom work for wealthy families over the years. The person who signs the check is the person with the real power. And in Sabrina's life, the person who signed the check, emotionally and financially and every other way, had always been her mother. Vivienne had spent 3 years quietly rooting against me and dreaming of Trevor. She thought her daughter had finally, at long last, traded up to the life she'd always felt they deserved. And I was about to knock on her door and hand her the itemized receipt for exactly the thing she'd been wishing for. I sat in Vivienne's spotless, over-decorated living room, and I declined her offer of tea, and I laid it all out flat. No anger in my voice, no accusation, just facts, one clean measurement after another. The way I present a quote to a client. I told her the wedding was off. She already knew that, and I watched her try to hide that she approved. Then I told her the part she didn't know. I told her about the $19,000. I took out my phone and I showed her the statements, the transfers, the small forgettable amounts, the labels that said florist and venue, and then I told her that one of the florists was a hotel 2 towns over, and I watched every drop of color drain out of her carefully powdered face. Because Vivienne, whatever else she was, loved exactly 2 things in this world above all others: appearances and money. And I had just set fire to both in a single sentence. "You must be mistaken," she said, but the steel had gone right out of her voice. "I build things for a living, Vivienne," I said gently. "I don't make measuring mistakes. Your daughter has been quietly moving my money into a private account for 4 months. She got engaged to another man while planning a wedding with me, in my house, funded partly with our shared savings, which she was skimming the whole time. I just thought, before you go raising a glass to Trevor Ashford, that you deserve to know exactly what sort of arrangement your daughter is bringing into that family, and exactly what kind of woman handles other people's money that way. I let it sit in the air between us. Vivienne was not a stupid woman. She was cold and calculating and utterly self-interested, and I had just handed her a calculation, and I watched, fascinated, as she ran it. Because here is what Vivienne heard, that I had already worked out in my truck 2 weeks before. If Sabrina would quietly drain the savings of a man who worshipped her, then what on earth would she do inside a wealthy family whose entire value, to Vivienne, was its wealth? A woman who steals is not an asset to rich in-laws. She is a liability, a scandal waiting to happen, a reason for the Ashfords to close ranks and freeze her out. And Vivienne's entire dream, the one she'd nursed for years, depended completely on that family wanting her daughter, welcoming her, keeping her. I had just shown her a crack in the foundation of the only thing she'd ever really wanted. "Why are you telling me this?" she finally asked, very quietly. "Because in a day or two you're going to hear a version of this story where I'm the bitter, jealous ex who couldn't handle being left," I said. "And I wanted you to have the true version first, from me, calmly, with the paperwork. What you decide to do with it is entirely your business. I'm not asking you for anything." Then I stood. I thanked her sincerely for her time, and I let myself out, and I left Vivienne Hale sitting alone in her spotless living room with a very, very unspotless truth. And notice, I never asked her to do a single thing. I didn't have to, because I know exactly how a woman like Vivienne operates. You hand her a fact that threatens her own plans, and she will act on it faster and harder and colder than I ever could. And by the end, she will genuinely believe the whole thing was her own idea. I just had to load the fact and step back, and let her aim herself. That was Wednesday. I spent Thursday and Friday doing the least dramatic and most important work of my entire life. I finished quietly separating everything that was mine, so that when the dust settled there would be nothing to fight over, only paperwork already filed. My lawyer had the joint account flagged and my share protected. He drafted a simple, polite letter about the $19,000 to hold in reserve. He confirmed again that the house and the business were untouchable, mine free and clear. You know what's funny? He told me over the phone, and I could hear the grin. "She did the hardest part for you. A woman who quietly documents her own theft and her own transfers has built the case against herself. All you have to do is keep your receipts and keep your temper. And Daniel, you're very good at keeping your temper. Stay calm, keep your receipts." I could have had it tattooed on my arm. Meanwhile, Sabrina had packed a few bags and moved into Trevor's world. And this is the part where I lean back and let you enjoy something. Because what happened next, I only learned in pieces afterward. From mutual friends, and one truly spectacular, unhinged voicemail she left me a month later. And it is so much better than anything I could have engineered myself. Trevor Ashford, it turned out, was not remotely the prince Vivienne had crowned in her imagination. Yes, the Ashford money was real, but it was old, and it was thinning. And most importantly, it was locked up tight in the fist of a father who had grown very tired of a son, who spent 5 years finding himself on a boat while finding nothing at all. Trevor had the watch, the haircut, the coupe, the accent of money. What he did not have was money. His father had cut him down to a modest allowance and a warning. And Trevor, being the kind of man who solves problems by marrying them, had come home from Europe with exactly one plan. Find a woman with stability, savings, a paid-off place, a real career, and marry into it. And who had he found? A gorgeous, charming, successful marketing executive named Sabrina Hale, who had told him, over all those long candlelit dinners, that she owned her condo outright, that she'd saved carefully for years, that she was the responsible, grounded, established woman his father would finally approve of. She'd sold him a version of herself as the safe harbor he could finally drop anchor in. 2 liars, each one absolutely certain that the other was the payday. You genuinely cannot make this up. And into that delicate, doomed little con walked Vivienne, my Vivienne, armed with the exact facts I had carefully handed her 3 days earlier, and she did precisely the thing I had known in my bones she would do. She arranged to meet Trevor, not to bless the happy union, to inspect the merchandise, mother to prospective son-in-law, to make sure her daughter was marrying into the fortune Vivienne had been dreaming about. And somewhere in that lunch, trying to protect her own dream, trying to make her daughter sound like a catch worthy of an Ashford, Vivienne let slip the very thing that detonated everything. She mentioned, as a boast, that, of course, the previous wedding had been quite lavish and quite far along, and that Sabrina was so wonderfully generous and independent that she'd been funding a great deal of it herself. Vivienne meant it as a compliment. She meant, my daughter is a woman of mean, but Trevor, sitting across that table, a man who had proposed specifically to a careful saver with a paid-off condo, heard something else entirely. He heard that his stable, responsible fiancée had drained a savings account to fund a wedding to another man. A wedding she was still knee-deep in planning 2 weeks before she said yes to him. He heard chaos where he'd been promised calm. He heard debt and mess, and a woman who was not, in any sense, the safe harbor he'd cast off to find. And the his con, developed a crack. And Trevor Ashford, being a genuine professional at leaving the second the money stopped adding up, put his thumb right into that crack and started to pull. It all came apart in my own driveway the following Saturday, and I had a front row seat to the whole thing entirely by accident. Sabrina still had a few boxes of things at my house, odds and ends she hadn't taken in her first frantic exit. She texted me, cool and businesslike, that she'd be coming by Saturday afternoon to collect them. What she did not tell me, what I only pieced together as it unfolded, was that she had also told Trevor to meet her there, and she had told her mother to come too, because Sabrina, feeling the ground shifting under her feet, sensing that something was going wrong with her beautiful new life, had done the most desperate thing a drowning person can do. She tried to get everyone into one room to reassure her that everything was still fine. Instead, without knowing it, she assembled the exact jury that was about to convict her in my driveway on a bright Saturday afternoon, with me as the only witness who had never told a single lie. I was out in the garage when they started to arrive. Sabrina first, in her car, chin high, not making eye contact. Then, a few minutes later, Vivian's sedan, gliding up to the curb. And then, last, a sleek little coupe I didn't recognize, which I assumed correctly was the last of Trevor's inheritance rolling around on 4 wheels. I came out of the garage wiping sawdust off my hands, honestly just wanting all of them off my property and out of my life. And I walked straight into the middle of the unraveling. Trevor was standing in my driveway, and he looked exactly like his photographs. The expensive haircut, the soft hands that had never gripped a tool or a rope in earnest despite all that sailing, the clothes that cost too much, and on his face, the specific, unmistakable expression of a man who has just realized he stepped in something and cannot scrape it off his shoe no matter how he tries. "You must be Daniel," he said. His voice was tight. "I didn't even know you existed until 2 weeks ago." She told me she was seeing someone. Casually. Nothing serious. "We were 3 years in and picking out a wedding venue," I said, keeping my voice easy. "That casual." His jaw flexed. He turned to Sabrina. "You told me you were free." "I was basically free," she started. "Daniel and I were we were engaged," I said quietly. "You're still wearing the tan line." And that stopped her cold, because it was true. A pale band on her finger where my grandmother's ring had lived for 6 months. Vivienne stepped forward then, because Vivienne always steps forward. But here is the twist that even I, who had set the whole board, did not see coming. The moment I realized this was going to be so much more satisfying than anything I could have designed, Vivienne did not defend her daughter. She turned on her. Oh, she did it smoothly at first. She started with damage control, that oil-smooth voice she used on people she wanted something from. "Trevor," she said warmly, "I think there has been a great deal of unfortunate confusion. And I want to be certain you understand that my daughter is a woman of real substance. She's simply been under a great deal of stress. She was trying to save the merger, but Trevor had spent 2 full weeks doing math, and Vivienne's own boastful words from their lunch were the numbers that refused to add up. A woman of substance," Trevor repeated flatly. "Right. Here's my problem, Vivienne. You told me yourself, at lunch, that she funded her own wedding." To him. He jerked his chin at me. "A wedding she was planning 2 weeks before she accepted my ring. So either she's got money she's been hiding from me, or she spent someone else's, and I'm looking at the someone else right now, and he does not look like a man who's been paid back." Every head turned to me, and I, heaven help me, told the truth, because the truth was the sharpest and cleanest tool I had, and I'd been sharpening it for a month. $19,000, I said plainly. Out of our joint savings, moved into a private account in her name only, over 4 months in small amounts, labeled as florists, caterers, venue deposits. Except I went to every wedding meeting we ever had, and I never met any of those vendors. And when I called the florist, they got a $600 deposit. A hotel answered the phone. I let that hang in the bright afternoon air. I've got the statements. I've got every transfer. I've got the receipts. It's all in a folder. Trevor's face did something genuinely wonderful to watch. It went pale. then it went hard, and then it settled into a cold, insulted fury, the very specific rage of a con man who has just discovered he's been outconned by his own mark. He wasn't heartbroken. Heartbreak was never on the table for Trevor. He was offended. "You told me you had savings," he said to Sabrina, his voice rising. "You told me the condo was paid off. You told me you were the responsible one. Is any of it real? Any of it?" "Trevor, I can explain. Everyone can explain," he snapped. "Everyone in this driveway can explain. That is not the same thing as it being true." And now Sabrina did the thing that told me she was truly, finally out of moves. She spun to her mother, the way a child spins to a parent when the game suddenly turns real and frightening. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked. "Mom, tell him. Tell him I'm not. Tell him I'm a good person. Tell him." And Vivian, faced with a clean choice between her own daughter and her own reputation, chose, without a flicker of hesitation, the thing she had always chosen. Herself. "I told him exactly what you told me," Vivian said, and her voice had gone to ice. "That you were handling the wedding yourself. I did not know it was Daniel's money, Sabrina. My God, $19,000? You let me sit across from this man and boast about your generosity when you were spending his savings?" And the horror in her voice, I want to be very clear, was not horror for me. It was the pure, undiluted horror of a woman who has just watched her prize horse come up lame in front of the buyer. The horror of realizing she'd been proudly showing off a fraud. "You lied to me too," Vivian went on, and her hands were actually shaking now with the insult of it. "You made me a liar in front of everyone. Do you understand what you've done to me? To this family's name?" There it was. To me. Not to Daniel. Not even to Trevor. To me, everything, always, was about what it did to Vivian. And I have to tell you, standing there in my own driveway with sawdust still on my jeans, watching the two people who thought I was beneath them tear each other apart over money that had been mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Real, quiet, settled peace. Because I hadn't had to lift a finger. I'd loaded one true fact into one calculating woman and stepped back. And now the whole rotten structure was collapsing under its own weight. Exactly the way a badly built cabinet does the moment you stop holding it up. Sabrina was crying now, real tears, but I noticed, even then, that they weren't for me, and they weren't even really for Trevor. They were for herself, for the beautiful life that was crumbling in real time. In my driveway, in front of an audience. "Trevor, please," she sobbed, turning back to him. "I chose you. I love you. I left him for you." "You chose me after you got caught," Trevor said. "And I'll give the man this. He had exactly one good line in him, and he used it well. That's not a choice. That's a landing." Then he pulled out his phone, and I braced myself, because I figured he had one last grenade to throw, and I was right. "For what it's worth," he said, turning to me, and for the first time his voice had something almost human in it, "she was texting me about wedding flowers the same week she was texting me about ours. She sent me a photo of centerpieces. I honestly thought she was showing me ideas for our wedding. Turns out they were yours." He turned the phone so I could see the screen. And there it was, a photo of our venue, our flowers, the exact arrangement Sabrina and I had picked out together on a Tuesday afternoon, sent to another man like a woman, comparison shopping 2 grooms in the same week. And do you know what I felt, looking at that photo? Not rage. Not even fresh hurt. I felt relief, clean and total. Because it was the very last measurement. The final confirmation that the entire board was rotten straight through, and I had been completely right to cut it out of my life. "Thank you," I told Trevor. And I meant it with my whole chest. "You just saved me from spending the rest of my life wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. If I was the crazy one." He looked at me for a second, and something almost like respect passed over his face. "Yeah," he said. "Me too, I think." Then he looked at Sabrina one last time. This woman that 2 men and her own mother were all, in the same 10 minutes, finished with. And he delivered his exit line. "Figure out what you actually want," he said, instead of grabbing at whoever's holding the better deal that particular week. And he got into his last inheritance coupe, and he backed out of my driveway, and he drove out of all of our lives, and I never saw him again, and neither, it turned out, did she. Vivienne left next, and this is the detail I'll never forget. She did not hug her daughter. She did not touch her. She gathered her purse and her dignity, and she clicked across my driveway in those expensive heels like a countdown timer running out. And at her car door she paused and looked back at Sabrina with an expression I had genuinely never seen on her face before. Not anger, not love, calculation, coming up empty. the look of a woman totaling a loss. "Come by the house," she said, "when you've sorted yourself out. Not tonight. Not come home, sweetheart. Let me take care of you. Sort yourself out first, and then you may return." And she got in her car, and she drove away too, and left her only daughter standing alone in my driveway, which left just the two of us, Sabrina and me, standing in exactly the same driveway where, 3 years earlier, I'd carried her over the threshold laughing on the day she moved in. Except now she was standing beside a small stack of cardboard boxes with her whole collapsed life inside them, and I was standing in the doorway of a house that was entirely, cleanly, uncomplicatedly mine. "You did this," she said. Her voice was shaking, and her makeup was ruined. And for just a second, I saw the girl from the barbecue underneath all of it. "You went to my mother. You told Trevor. You planned all of this." "I told the truth," I said, and my voice was gentle, because there was no reason left for it not to be. "That's all I did, Sabrina. I told the truth, calmly, to the people who had a right to hear it. You did every other part of this yourself. Every single piece. I just stopped standing in front of it, protecting you from the consequences of your own choices. I loved you," she whispered. And here, for the first and only time that whole month, the smile finally left my face. Not because I was angry, because I finally understood something, and I wanted her to hear it clearly, without a smirk, as the last true thing I would ever give her. "No," I said quietly. "You loved being loved. There's a difference, Sabrina, and I learned it the most expensive way a man can learn it. You loved being adored, and safe, and chosen, and you'd have traded me for a better offer the second one came along. And one did. And you did. You didn't love me. You loved what I did for you. And the day I stopped doing it, you were already gone." She wanted to fight. I could see it flickering behind her eyes, the search for an angle, a counter, a way to make me the villain. But there was nothing left to grab, because I hadn't given her anything to hold, so instead she just stood there. And then she started, slowly, to load her boxes into her car. And here's the thing about me that I've made my peace with. I'm not a cruel man. I'm a careful one. So I helped her. I carried the heaviest box, the one full of books, and I set it in her trunk, because I decided that the very last thing she'd remember about me was not going to be me being small. I was going to walk out of her story exactly the way I walked through it, calm. When the boxes were all loaded, she got into her car, and she sat there for a moment behind the wheel. And I watched her sit there the exact same way she used to sit in that driveway texting Trevor and smiling at her phone, except now there was no one on the other end of the line. No Trevor, no mother waiting with open arms, no wedding, no ring. Just a woman in a loaded car in a driveway that had never really been hers, with nowhere left to go but backward. And then she left. I stood in my driveway until her taillights turned the corner at the end of the street and disappeared. And then I went back inside my house, and I closed the door. Soft, not slammed. And I stood in the quiet. And I want to tell you, that silence was the best sound I'd heard in over a year. Now, you probably want to know how it all shook out, so let me tie off the loose ends, because there's real satisfaction in the ends. The $19,000 came back. Most of it, my lawyer sent that polite letter he'd been holding. A calm little note reminding Sabrina and her newly reduced circumstances that the theft of joint funds, documented meticulously in her own transfers, in her own handwriting, was not a strong position for a woman with no leverage and no lawyer of her own to be standing in. She paid it back in installments rather than face a claim she was guaranteed to lose. Every month for the better part of a year, a small deposit landed in my account. And every month I thought, there's another board I cut clean. And then there was the voicemail, the one I mentioned earlier. The spectacular one she left me about 6 weeks after the driveway. I'd like to tell you I deleted it out of dignity, but the truth is I kept it for a while, because it was the single clearest picture anyone ever painted of who she really was. And she painted it herself, drunk, at 1 in the morning, into a phone she thought was still connected to a man who'd take her back. It went on for almost 4 minutes. It started as an apology. Then it became an accusation. That I'd ruined her. That I'd humiliated her in front of Trevor. That no decent man would have gone to her mother. Then, and this is the part I want you to really hear, it turned into a pitch. She said she'd made a mistake. She said Trevor was a fraud, which was rich. She said she missed my house, and she caught herself and said she missed me. But she'd already said the house first, and you can't unring that bell. She said we could start over. She said she'd learned so much. And right at the end, half crying, She said the thing that let me delete it and finally sleep the whole night through. She said, "You need me, Daniel. A man like you doesn't get a woman like me twice." And I remember lying there in the dark of my paid-off house, in my quiet, hearing her tell me I needed her, and understanding all the way down to my bones that she had it exactly backward, and always had. She'd needed what I provided. I had needed nothing from her but the truth, and the day she finally gave it to me was the day I got free. I never called back. Trevor Ashford went back to sailing on other people's money and stopped answering her calls within a month. I'm told she left him several. I'm told none were returned. Vivienne, from what I hear, now tells people at her club that her daughter simply had a difficult year, which is a masterpiece of a sentence when you think about what it's covering. And Sabrina moved back into her mother's guest room, the exact place she'd spent her whole adult life clawing to escape. Only this time, she climbed back in carrying a reputation instead of a ring, a whispered story instead of a future. Last I heard, she was still there. And me? I kept my house. I kept my shop. I kept my truck and my tools and my business and my name and my quiet. I put my grandmother's ring back in the drawer where it belongs, and it's still there, waiting for a hand that won't try to pawn it. And that drawer face I'd been sanding at 1 in the morning the night this whole thing started, the one I couldn't sleep instead of finishing, I finished it, and it came out perfect. Tight joints, clean grain, square corners, the kind of work that outlasts the man who made it. Here's what I learned, and it's the only thing I really came here to tell you, so lean in. When somebody shows you that they'll trade you the moment a better offer walks by, believe them the very first time, and then don't waste 1 hour of your life hating them for it. Hate is loud, and loud is losing. Instead, do the quiet thing. Protect what's yours. Tell the truth to the people who need it, plainly, without heat, and then step back and let the ones who lied destroy themselves reaching for the exits, because they always, always do. The sharpest revenge in this world was never rage. It's a calm man telling a simple truth and refusing, absolutely refusing, to be the one who pays for someone else's lie. My fiancée sat across from me at our own kitchen table, twisting my grandmother's ring, and told me she'd said yes to another man, and she waited, so patiently, for me to break. I smiled instead, and that smile is still, to this day, the best decision I have ever made. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our upcoming stories. Your support means the world to us.